The air conditioner in the conference room on the 22nd floor hissed once again, and Patricia Sterling, Executive Director of Tech Vision Consulting, frowned with irritation. The room was packed with 15 executives, all in impeccable suits, as she presented the quarterly numbers that had surpassed all projections. It was her moment of glory, but that unbearable noise was ruining everything. With an impatient snap of her fingers, she interrupted her own presentation and called the front desk via the intercom. Minutes later, the door opened, and a man in blue coveralls entered, carrying a toolbox. Charlie Edwards was 45, with graying hair at his temples and hands marked by hard work. He gave a discreet nod and headed straight for the air conditioning unit without making a sound. Patricia returned to her presentation, but her eyes kept drifting back to the maintenance worker. There was something about him that bothered her. Perhaps it was the calm with which he worked, oblivious to the importance of the meeting. Or perhaps it was simply the presence of someone so inferior in that environment of power. When Charlie climbed the ladder to reach the equipment, making the metal structure creak slightly, Patricia lost her composure. She slammed her palm on the glass table, making everyone jump. "Look at this," she interrupted, her cutting voice echoing through the room. Everyone looked at her in surprise. Patricia pointed at Charlie with a cruel smile on her lips. "While we are here discussing millions in contracts, we have to put up with this noise. Tell me, honey," she spoke directly to him, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "How long did it take you to learn how to turn a screwdriver?" Charlie stopped what he was doing and climbed down the ladder. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment Patricia saw something in that gaze she couldn't decipher. But he simply replied in a calm voice, "As long as necessary, ma'am." The simple, non-confrontational answer seemed to irritate her even more. She stood up from her chair, her high heels clicking on the marble floor as she walked to the panoramic window. Outside, on the company helipad, the corporate helicopter gleamed under the New York City sun. It was her favorite toy, the ultimate symbol of the power she had achieved. "You know what?" she said, turning dramatically to the group. "I find it fascinating. How people accept their places in life without question." She looked directly at Charlie. "You see that helicopter out there? I bet you've never even dreamed of piloting something like that, have you?" Some executives laughed nervously. Others looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Robert Stone, the CFO, coughed and tried to resume the meeting, but Patricia silenced him with a gesture. No, let me finish my thought." She was loving the attention. "I'm going to make a proposal," she pointed at Charlie again. "If you can fly that helicopter, I'll marry you. How about that?" The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner Charlie had just fixed. Mark Travers, the COO, let out a nervous laugh but was quickly silenced by Patricia's icy stare. Charlie stood motionless for a few seconds, the toolbox still in his hand. Then, to everyone's absolute astonishment, he nodded slowly. "I accept the challenge," he said, his voice firm and clear. Patricia's jaw dropped. She clearly hadn't expected that answer. She recovered quickly, however, and a shrill laugh escaped her lips. "You accept?" She turned to the other executives. "Did you hear that? He accepts. I have just one condition," Charlie continued, taking a step forward, "that you honor your word in front of everyone present here. Let it be on the record that this was an official proposal from the executive director." Something in his tone, in the way he spoke, made Patricia hesitate for a split second. But her arrogance quickly took over again. "Of course I'll honor it," she said, crossing her arms. "When you fail miserably, I want everyone to attest that you had your chance." Charlie nodded. "Then it's a deal. When should I report to the helipad?" Patricia looked at the diamond-encrusted watch on her wrist. It was Friday, almost noon. A malicious idea crossed her mind. "How about right now? In half an hour?" She smiled wickedly. "Or do you need time to study how to start a helicopter on YouTube?" "Half an hour is perfect," Charlie replied simply. "I'll go get ready." As he left the room with his toolbox, Patricia was already grabbing her phone. "Sarah," she called her assistant over the line, "I want you to send a message to all departments, IT, marketing, sales, everyone. Tell them that at 12:30 p.m. we will have A special event at the helipad, a spectacle they won't want to miss. The executives in the room began to murmur among themselves. Julia Miller, the marketing director, tried to intervene. "Patricia, don't you think this is going too far? The man is just a maintenance worker trying to do his job." Patricia turned to her with blazing eyes. "Too far? He accepted the challenge, Julia. He accepted it of his own free will. If he had an ounce of sense, he would have refused." She went back to typing on her phone. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to ensure we have an adequate audience for this memorable moment." Robert tried again. "Patricia, think about the company's image. If this leaks on social media—" "Great!" she exclaimed, her eyes shining with malice. "Let it leak. It will be an excellent lesson for everyone about knowing their place." She stopped and looked at him with disdain. "Robert, you're getting soft. That's why I'm sitting in the executive director chair and you're not." In the next 20 minutes, the news spread through the company like wildfire. Messages buzzed from phone to phone. Employees on the 5th floor told friends on the 10th. The IT team alerted the finance guys. In minutes, it seemed the entire TechVision consulting firm knew about the impossible challenge. Marianne Sanders, the human resources manager, received the news via a group text. Her heart raced when she read the content. She had known Patricia for years and knew exactly what the director was capable of. But this was crossing every line. Dropping the report she was reviewing, Marianne grabbed her tablet and practically ran toward the helipad. She needed to at least try to stop this insanity before something terrible happened. As she climbed the stairs, because the elevators were packed with employees heading to the same place, she tried to formulate arguments that might make Patricia back down. At the helipad on the roof of the building, a crowd was already forming. The news had spread not just within the company. Some employees were already live streaming on social media. Dozens of phones were held high, ready to capture what everyone believed would be the ultimate humiliation of a simple maintenance worker. Patricia arrived like a queen, accompanied by her closest executives. She had touched up her makeup and adjusted the red blazer she wore. She smiled at everyone, waving as if she were at a gala. Adrienne Fisher, from Internal Communications, was already positioned with a professional camera, ready to document everything. The helicopter was parked in the center of the helipad, its blades shining under the harsh sun. It was a Robinson R-44, 4 seats, with the company's corporate blue and silver paint job. The sight was intimidating, even for those accustomed to seeing it. "Where is our improvised pilot?" Patricia asked loudly, drawing laughs from the crowd. "Did he chicken out? I can't say I blame him." That was when Charlie appeared. He had set aside the coveralls and was wearing clean jeans and a simple white polo shirt. His hair was slicked back, and he walked with a calm that contrasted completely with the tension in the air. In his hand, he carried only a small ID card. The crowd parted to let him through, and a strange silence took over the place. There was something different about him now. Without the coveralls, without the tools, he looked different. Several employees began to furrow their brows, as if trying to remember where they had seen him before. Patricia, however, was too far gone in her power fantasy to notice anything strange. She walked up to him, heels clicking on the concrete, and stopped inches from his face. Then she announced loud enough for everyone to hear, "Are you ready for your public humiliation?" Charlie looked her in the eye without blinking. "I'm ready to fly the helicopter, as agreed." Patricia gave a shrill laugh. "You know what? I'm going to make this even more interesting." She turned to the crowd. "If he actually manages to make this machine fly, he gets a $50,000 bonus." A murmur of surprise ran through the crowd. $50,000 was a significant sum. "But," Patricia continued, raising a finger, "if he fails, if he can't even start the engine, he will resign, immediately, in front of all of you." The silence that fell over the helipad was deafening. Marianne Sanders finally managed to push to the front of the crowd, panting after running up 22 flights of stairs. She saw Patricia with that cruel smile on her face and felt her stomach churn. "Patricia, this has gone too far," she said, trying to keep her voice steady despite being out of breath. "You can't do this. This is harassment, public humiliation. The company could be sued." Patricia turned to her with icy eyes. "Marianne, darling." He accepted the terms. "Everyone here is a witness." She gestured to the crowd. "There is nothing illegal about giving someone an opportunity. If he fails, it's his own fault for thinking he could fly too high." "But demanding resignation as a consequence of a challenge you created," Marianne insisted, stepping forward. "That violates at least 3 articles of the company's code of conduct, not to mention labor laws." Patricia's expression hardened. "You're starting to annoy me, Marianne. This is a matter between him and me. Now, if you don't mind, we have a show to watch." She made a dismissive gesture with her hand. "You can go back to your department. I'm sure you have paperwork to file." Marianne looked at Charlie, expecting to see fear or hesitation in his face. But what she saw was different. He was calm, almost serene, as if he knew something no one else did. His eyes met hers, and he gave a slight nod, as if to say everything was okay. Against all her professional instincts, Marianne stepped back, but she kept her phone raised, recording everything. If this was going to end in a lawsuit, she would have all the necessary evidence. Charlie turned to Patricia. "So it's confirmed," he said calmly. "If I fly the helicopter, I get $50,000, and you keep your promise of marriage. If I fail to start the engine, I resign." "Exactly," Patricia replied with a victorious smile. "And everyone here is a witness." She pulled out her own phone. "I'm even recording it to ensure no one forgets the agreement." Charlie nodded and began walking toward the helicopter. The crowd stepped back further, creating a wide path for him. Some employees whispered among themselves, placing bets. Most thought it impossible. A few, however, had a different expression on their faces, as if they were starting to put together pieces of a puzzle. Frank Costello, one of the most senior IT technicians in the company, nudged his colleague. "Dude," he whispered, "there's something weird about this. That guy, I swear I've seen him somewhere before, and he wasn't wearing maintenance coveralls." Meanwhile, Charlie had reached the helicopter. He walked around the aircraft slowly, inspecting every detail with experienced eyes. He checked the rotor blades, looked inside the engine compartment, touched the landing skids. Every movement was deliberate and professional. "What's the hold-up?" Patricia shouted, impatient. "Are you looking up the start button on Google?" The crowd laughed, but the laughter sounded nervous. There was something about the way Charlie moved around the helicopter that didn't match the image of a simple maintenance worker. He didn't look intimidated or lost. He looked like he was doing a routine pre-flight check. Charlie ignored the comment and opened the pilot's door. He climbed into the seat with a fluid, natural motion, like someone who had done it thousands of times. He settled into the seat, adjusted the seat belts, and reached for the headset hanging to the side. In the corner of the helipad, John Paul J.P. Andrews, the company's head of security, was watching everything with heightened attention. Something about this whole situation didn't smell right. He grabbed his radio and called Security Command. "This is J.P. I need you to check the authorization logs for the helicopter. We have someone attempting to pilot it." The voice of the security operator came through the radio. "Name of the individual?" J.P. looked at Charlie but didn't know his full name. He was about to ask when Marianne approached him. "Charles Edwards," she said softly, showing her tablet screen. "Maintenance staff, hired 6 months ago." She frowned as she scrolled. "Strange, though. There's very little in his file. Just the basics." J.P. relayed the name over the radio and waited. Meanwhile, in the helicopter, Charlie had put on the headset and begun a series of checks. His fingers moved over the controls with impressive familiarity. He checked the fuel gauges, tested the pedals, adjusted the cyclic and collective. "He really knows what he's doing," murmured Lucas Allen, an engineering intern. "Like, those are the correct controls," he pointed. "See, the collective controls altitude, the cyclic controls direction. He's checking them in the right order." "How do you know that?" asked the colleague next to him. "My dad was a pilot," Lucas replied, eyes wide. "And that guy there is doing exactly what my dad used to do before takeoff." Patricia obviously wasn't listening to these conversations. She was too busy commenting live on her social media, narrating what she believed to be the imminent defeat of an employee who dared to challenge her. Her stream already had over 1,000 Views and the comments ranged from shocked to amused. Charlie continued his methodical verification. He tested the flight controls, checked the instruments, confirmed everything was in order. Then, with a decisive movement, his hand moved to the ignition panel. "Now comes the good part," Patricia announced to her phone camera. "Watch him try to figure out how to turn on this $2 million machine." Charlie's hand moved with confidence. He turned the key, adjusted the throttle, and engaged the starter. For a moment, there was just the initial click of the electrical systems. Patricia smiled triumphantly. But then, the engine roared to life. The sound was unmistakable, a rising roar that made everyone on the helipad step back instinctively. The rotor blades began to spin, slowly at first, then faster and faster. The wind generated by the movement swept across the helipad, messing up hair and making papers fly. Patricia's smile froze on her face. Her phone almost slipped from her trembling hand. "He started it!" someone shouted in the crowd. "He actually started the engine!" "But starting it is just the beginning," Patricia shouted back, trying to maintain composure. "Making it fly is completely different. He's still going to fail." At that exact moment, JP's radio crackled. "JP, are you still there?" "Yeah, I am. Did you find something?" "I did." The operator's voice sounded confused. "The record for Charles Edwards shows total access level, maximum presidential authorization. He can access any area of the company, including flying the helicopter." "What?" JP said, stunned. "Are you sure? A maintenance guy?" "That's what's in the system. Approved by the chairman personally. Unrestricted access." JP looked at Marianne, who was beside him and had heard everything. Her eyes were wide with shock. She immediately opened the HR system on her tablet, searching for Charlie's complete file. While she searched in the helicopter, Charlie was executing the final checks before takeoff. He gradually increased the engine power, testing the control's response. The helicopter began to shake slightly, wanting to leave the ground. The crowd was silent now, all eyes fixed on the aircraft. Even Patricia had stopped talking, her phone hanging loosely in her hand. She watched, pale, as the man she had humiliated demonstrated skills that shouldn't have been there. Charlie looked over the controls one last time. Satisfied, he gently pulled up on the collective. The helicopter responded immediately. The skids, leaving the ground inch by inch. "He's flying," someone whispered, voice full of awe. "My God, he's actually flying." The helicopter rose smoothly, hovering steadily about 6 feet off the ground. Charlie maintained this height for a few seconds, demonstrating perfect control. Then, with precise movements, he began to rotate the aircraft slowly on its axis. The maneuver was clean, professional, a complete 360-degree turn without wobbles or shakes. When he completed the turn, Charlie raised the helicopter a few more feet and executed a controlled ascent and descent, as if drawing in the air. The crowd erupted in applause. Even those who had rooted against him, hoping to see him fail, couldn't help but admire the display of skill. Phones recorded from every angle, capturing every second. Patricia was frozen in place, her face going from white to red as she watched the impossible happen before her eyes. The helicopter executed maneuvers that even experienced pilots would find challenging. Charlie tilted the aircraft slightly to the right, then to the left, demonstrating absolute command over every movement. Marianne, still staring at her tablet, began to shake. Her fingers slid frantically across the screen, opening file after file. JP leaned in, trying to see what she had found. "What is it, Marianne? What did you find?" She looked up, completely pale. "JP, there is something very wrong here. His file, it has layers upon layers of protection. I could only access the first page of basic info." She pointed to the screen. "But here, in this footnote almost no one would see, it says the full file is locked. Chairman level." "And what does that mean exactly?" Marianne swallowed hard. "It means only the owner of the company can access his full data." She looked at Charlie in the helicopter. "JP, that man isn't a simple maintenance worker. He can't be." As they spoke, Charlie began to lower the helicopter slowly. The descent was so smooth it looked rehearsed, every movement calculated with millimeter precision. The crowd watched in reverent silence, as if witnessing something historic. When the helicopter skids touched the ground again, The contact was so delicate it was barely audible. Charlie kept the engine running for a few more seconds, executing the correct shutdown procedure, before finally turning the key and letting the rotor blades gradually slow down. The silence that followed was broken by an explosion of applause and cheers. Employees jumped and cheered as if they had just watched an air show stunt. Some were crying with emotion, others just shook their heads in disbelief. Charlie removed the headset, unbuckled the seatbelts, and climbed out of the helicopter with the same calm he had entered. His feet touched the helipad floor, and he turned to face Patricia, who was about 30 feet away. The executive director looked like she had aged 10 years in the last few minutes. Her impeccable makeup was smudged with sweat, and her hands were visibly trembling. She tried to speak, but the words seemed stuck in her throat. Charlie walked toward her with firm steps. The crowd parted automatically, creating a corridor between them. The only sound was the click of Patricia's heels as she instinctively backed away. "Are you satisfied?" Charlie asked, his voice calm but firm enough for everyone to hear. "Flying the helicopter was the challenge. I fulfilled my part." Patricia tried to laugh, but it came out more like a choke. That was luck. You probably flew before. That doesn't count." An indignant murmur ran through the crowd. Marianne stepped forward, tablet still in hand. "Patricia," she said firmly, "you made a promise in front of witnesses. It's all recorded." She gestured to the dozens of phones still pointed at them. Literally hundreds of people recorded this. It's even being streamed live. Patricia looked around, realizing for the first time the magnitude of what she had done. Her face went from red to purple. "That was a joke," she screamed, desperate. "Everyone knows it was a joke. No one really expected me to marry a maintenance worker." Charlie took another step toward her. "A joke," he repeated, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel. "Interesting. Because when you raised the bet to $50,000 and demanded my resignation if I failed, that didn't sound like a joke. That sounded like a cruel attempt to humiliate me publicly." I was just," Patricia stammered, searching desperately for words. "Look, I'll give you the $50,000, okay? Consider it compensation for any misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Charlie repeated, shaking his head. 6 months. For 6 months I've worked in this company fixing air conditioners, changing light bulbs, unclogging pipes, and every single day I heard you humiliate someone." He looked at the crowd. "How many of you have been ridiculed by her?" A heavy silence fell. Then slowly hands began to rise. 1, 2, 10, 20. More than half the employees present raised their hands. Some had tears in their eyes. "You are pathetic," Patricia spat out, completely losing her composure. "You're just a maintenance worker who learned to fly a helicopter somewhere. That doesn't make you special. That doesn't change the fact that you are far beneath me." Charlie smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Beneath you," he repeated. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a card. It wasn't a standard employee ID. It was different, made of heavier material with gold-embossed details. He extended the card to Patricia. "Maybe you want to read this before you continue." Patricia took the card with shaking hands. Her eyes scanned the printed words and she felt the blood drain completely from her face. The card simply said, "Charles Edwards, founder and chairman, Tech Vision Consulting, total access." "No," she whispered, the card almost slipping from her fingers. "This is fake. This has to be fake." Marianne had finally managed to log into the system with emergency credentials. She looked at the tablet screen and felt the world spin. "Patricia," she said, her voice barely coming out, "it's true, I just confirmed it. Charles Edwards is registered as the founder and majority shareholder of the company, 70% of the stock." The crowd erupted in exclamations of shock. Employees looked at one another trying to process the information. The man they saw fixing toilets and changing air filters was, in fact, the owner of the company. Robert Stone, the CFO, had arrived at the helipad in the last few minutes and heard the final revelations. His face was grey. "Charles," he said, voice trembling. "I had no idea. We had no idea." Charlie turned to him. "I know, Robert, and that was exactly the point." He looked at the crowd. 6 months ago, I started receiving worrying reports about the work culture here. Reports of harassment, people resigning in alarming numbers, an atmosphere of generalized fear. He paused. So I decided to investigate personally. You were spying on us, Patricia managed to say, trying to turn the situation against him. You were deceiving your own employees. I was saving my company, Charlie corrected, his voice harder now. A company I built from scratch, which had values and principles, and I discovered that in my absence it turned into something unrecognizable. He looked directly at Patricia. I discovered there was an executive director who believed humiliating people was an acceptable management strategy. Marianne stepped forward, the tablet still in her hand. Mr. Edwards, she said formally, there is something else you need to know. In the last 6 months, we received 83 formal complaints of harassment. She paused, her voice breaking slightly. Most were archived by management without proper investigation. Employee turnover is at 42%, 3 times the industry average. Charlie closed his eyes for a moment, as if absorbing a physical blow. When he opened them again, there was an iron determination in them. Patricia Sterling, he said formally, you are suspended from your duties, effective immediately. Go to your office and wait. We are going to have a long conversation very soon. You can't do this, Patricia screamed, but her voice sounded desperate now. I brought record profits to this company. I increased revenue by 40%. Charlie took a step toward her, and for the first time Patricia saw genuine anger in his eyes. At what cost, Patricia? At what cost? He gestured to the employees around them. Do you know how many of these people developed mental health issues because of the environment you created? How many developed anxiety, depression, burnout? Patricia opened her mouth to answer, but no sound came out. She looked around, seeking support, but found only closed faces or looks of pity. Even the executives who used to follow her blindly now looked away. Julia Miller, the marketing director who had tried to intervene earlier, stepped forward. Charles, she said hesitantly, if I may speak, many of us here, especially in leadership, failed. We saw what was happening and did nothing. Her voice shook. I saw people crying in the bathroom. I saw people having panic attacks before meetings with Patricia, and I didn't do anything because I was afraid of losing my own job. Other executives began to nod, some with tears in their eyes. Robert wiped a hand across his face, looking like he had aged years in minutes. We have to accept our responsibility, he said. We allowed this to happen. We used the financial numbers as an excuse to ignore people's suffering. Charlie observed each of them carefully. He could see genuine regret in some faces, but he also knew words were easy. Actions were what mattered. I am calling an emergency meeting with the entire board, he announced. In 2 hours, in the main conference room. All directors and senior managers must be present. He turned to Patricia, who was still in shock. You will be there too. This is your opportunity to explain yourself formally. Until then, go to your office and reflect on everything that happened here. Patricia finally found her voice, though it came out hoarse and weak. You planned all this, didn't you? This helicopter challenge, making me look like an idiot in front of everyone. It was a trap from the start. Charlie shook his head slowly. I didn't set anything up, Patricia. I was just fixing an air conditioner. You were the one who decided to turn it into a spectacle. You were the one who decided to humiliate someone publicly. He paused. All I did was give you a rope. You chose to hang yourself with it. The crowd watched in absolute silence. Several employees had expressions of satisfaction, finally seeing someone stand up to the person who had made their lives miserable. Others looked apprehensive, wondering what would happen to the company now. Patricia spun on her heels and began walking toward the helipad exit. Her steps were rigid, mechanical. Adrian, her communications aide, tried to follow, but Patricia dismissed her with a sharp wave of her hand. She wanted to be alone with her humiliation. After she left, Charlie turned to the employees still gathered. I know you all have many questions, he said, his voice carrying easily in the silence. And I promise I will answer them. But for now I need you to return to your departments. He looked around. And I ask please that you treat this situation with discretion. I know many of you were live streaming, but I ask you to consider the impact this might have on the company's image. One of the interns raised his hand timidly. "Mr. Edwards, can I ask a question?" Charlie nodded. "Of course, what's your name?" "Lucas, sir. Lucas Allen." The young man swallowed hard. "Are you really going to change things? Or is this just a show to calm everyone down?" The question was direct, almost disrespectful, but Charlie smiled. It was exactly the kind of questioning he wanted to encourage. "I am going to change things, Lucas. That is my commitment to you and everyone here." He looked at the crowd. This company was built on values of respect, collaboration, and excellence. Somehow we lost that along the way, but we will get it back. Slowly, the employees began to disperse. Many stopped to shake Charlie's hand, thanking him or simply expressing shock at discovering his true identity. Some shared quick stories of how Patricia had treated them poorly, as if they could finally speak freely. When most had left, Marianne approached Charlie, still holding the tablet. "Mr. Edwards," she said formally, "I would like to apologize. As Human Resources Manager, I should have done more to protect our employees." Charlie placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Marianne, you did what you could within the limitations of your position. I saw your reports, all of them. I saw how you tried to escalate issues to the board." He sighed. "The problem is that the board chose to ignore them." "She is right about one thing," Marianne said softly. "Profits really did increase under her management." Charlie shook his head. "And what is the value of profits built on people's suffering?" He looked at the NYC skyline. "I prefer to have a smaller, more human company than a money-making machine that destroys lives in the process." JP joined them, looking embarrassed. "Mr. Edwards, I apologize for not recognizing you. I should have checked better when you started working here." Charlie gave a tired smile. "JP, you did exactly what you should have. Adequate security without being invasive. Actually," he pulled up a nearby plastic chair and sat down. "I'm impressed with how well the security protocol worked. No one recognized me in 6 months. It was too intentional," Marianne realized. "You wanted to remain anonymous." "I needed to," Charlie corrected. "How could I truly understand what was happening if everyone knew who I was? People would have acted differently, said different things." He sighed deeply. "I needed to see the company through the eyes of a common employee, and what I saw broke my heart." Robert approached the group, looking like he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Charles, can I speak with you for a moment?" Charlie nodded, and Robert sat in another chair. "For years, I saw Patricia build this toxic culture," the CFO confessed, "and I did nothing because the numbers were good. She hit targets, exceeded projections." He looked at his own hands. "I convinced myself that the results justified the means." "And now," Charlie asked softly, "what do you think?" Robert looked up and there were tears in his eyes. "Now I think I'm an accomplice. Every employee who left, every person who got sick because of stress is partially my responsibility. I could have stopped it, but I chose to look the other way." "Recognition is the first step," Charlie said, "but words aren't enough, Robert. I'm going to need concrete actions from all of you in leadership." "Are you going to fire me?" Robert asked, his voice resigned. Charlie remained silent for a moment. "That depends," he finally said. "It depends on whether you are willing to truly change, to put people above profits, to have the courage to confront toxic behavior even when it comes from someone who is hitting targets." Robert nodded slowly. "I am. I swear I am." "We'll see," Charlie said, standing up. "The meeting is in 2 hours. I suggest you and the other directors use this time to think very hard about the type of company you want to help build going forward." As Robert walked away, Marianne remained beside Charlie. "Mr. Edwards," she said hesitantly, "what will happen to Patricia? Are you going to fire her?" Charlie looked at the horizon. "Honestly, Marianne, I haven't decided yet. Part of me wants to simply cut her from the company immediately, but another part thinks maybe she deserves a chance to understand the damage she caused, to perhaps even repair part of it." "She won't change," Marianne said with conviction. "I've known her for years. People like her don't change." "Maybe you're right," Charlie agreed, "but I need to at least give her the opportunity to try. If not for her, for the others who might be watching and learning. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity. Charlie went to his old office, which had remained closed since he started his undercover investigation. It was a spacious room, with a panoramic view of the city, decorated simply but tastefully. He took off the casual clothes and put on a suit that was kept in the closet. As he adjusted his tie, he looked at himself in the mirror. The reflection showed the same man as always, but now without the disguise, without the coveralls, without the purposeful grime, without the stooped posture he had adopted. The main conference room was silent when Charlie entered. All directors and senior managers were already present, seated around the large mahogany table. The contrast was striking. Whereas before there would be animated chatter and laughter, now the silence was heavy, almost suffocating. Patricia was seated in the furthest corner alone. Her face was washed, the smudged makeup removed, revealing red and swollen eyes. She stared fixedly at her own hands, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Charlie took his place at the head of the table. Marianne was beside him with a laptop open, ready to document everything. JP was positioned discreetly near the door, more for protocol than real necessity. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Charlie began, his voice firm but not hostile. "I know this has been a shocking day for everyone. Finding out that your chairman was working undercover as a maintenance worker isn't something that happens every day." Some directors tried to smile nervously, but the tension in the room was palpable. "Before we begin," Charlie continued, "I want to make something very clear. This is not a witch hunt. I'm not here to simply fire people and spread blame. I'm here because I want to save this company, and more importantly, I want to save the people who work in it." He opened a folder Marianne had prepared. "In the last 6 months, I worked side by side with our employees. I cleaned bathrooms with the cleaning crew. I fixed equipment with the technicians. I ate in the cafeteria with interns and analysts." He paused, letting the words resonate. "And what I saw terrified me." Julia Miller cleared her throat. "Charles, if I may speak, many of us here knew there were problems, but we had no idea of the extent." "You had no idea," Charlie repeated, his voice gaining a harder edge. "Or you didn't want to see." He opened the laptop in front of him and turned the screen so everyone could see. "This here is a compilation of complaints from the last 6 months. 83 formal complaints of harassment. And do you know how many were adequately investigated?" He paused dramatically. 3, just 3. The silence in the room was absolute. Several directors had gone pale. Continuing, Charlie clicked to the next slide. "Employee turnover rate, 42% in the last 12 months. For context, our industry average is 14%. He looked around the table. "That means nearly half the people working here a year ago are gone. Do you really think that is normal? That is sustainable?" Mark Travers, the COO, raised his hand timidly. "People leave for various reasons, Charles. Not everything can be attributed to the work environment." "You're right," Charlie agreed. "That's why Marianne and I did something we should have done a long time ago. We contacted employees who left and asked why." He clicked again. 68% cited a toxic work environment as the main reason. 32% specifically mentioned harassment from management. He turned directly to Patricia. "And do you know whose name appeared repeatedly in those reports, Patricia?" She didn't answer, but her hands shook visibly. Marianne took the floor. "We also conducted confidential interviews with current employees," she said, her voice professional but with a note of contained emotion. "The reports are devastating. We have employees developing severe anxiety, depression, insomnia. A 26-year-old analyst started having panic attacks. Before every team meeting, a project manager developed stomach ulcers due to stress. Those are personal problems," Patricia finally spoke, her voice defensive but weak. "We cannot be held responsible for individual mental health issues." Charlie slammed his palm on the table, making everyone jump. "Personal problems? When dozens of people develop the same symptoms, all pointing to the same cause, that is not a coincidence." His voice reverberated through the room. "That is a pattern, that is a systemic toxic environment." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "I built this company 15 years ago," he said, more calmly now. "I started with 3 people in a rented office. Our first employee was Claire." He smiled at the memory. She was an IT intern, had just graduated. Julia nodded. I remember Claire. She was brilliant. She was, Charlie agreed, turning around. And do you know where she is now? She works for our competitor. She left 8 months ago because, in her words, she couldn't take the psychological pressure anymore. He looked directly at Patricia. She wrote me a letter. Said she cried every night, had nightmares about coming to work, that she was considering leaving the tech field completely because she associated the profession with suffering. Robert cleared his throat. Charles, I know we made grave mistakes, but you need to understand the financial results under Patricia's management were extraordinary. Revenue increased 40%. Profit margins are the best in our history. And at what cost, Robert? Charlie fired back. We increased profits by destroying people. We hired brilliant talent and broke them systematically. He returned to his chair. Tell me, what is the value of profits built on trauma and human suffering? There is no value, a voice said from the door. Everyone turned. It was Sophie Carter, the new IT manager. I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Edwards, but I felt I needed to speak. She entered the room, visibly trembling. I've worked here for 4 years. For the first 2, I loved coming to work. In the last 2, under the current management, I developed severe anxiety. I take medication daily just to be able to enter this building. Charlie nodded for her to continue. Sophie looked around the table, her eyes finally landing on Patricia. You called me incompetent in front of my entire team because a server went down during scheduled maintenance. You made me stay until midnight redoing reports that were perfectly adequate, just because you wanted to see me suffer. Tears began to run down her face. I'm 29 years old, and my doctor says I have high blood pressure because of the stress. Patricia opened her mouth, but Charlie raised a hand. Let her finish. I was ready to resign next week, Sophie continued. But then I heard what happened at the helipad. I heard that finally someone was going to do something. She wiped her tears. So I came here to beg. Please, do something. Because if not, we are going to lose every good professional left. Charlie waited a moment before speaking. Sophie, thank you for your courage in coming here and sharing this. He looked at the directors. This is the true cost of our blind pursuit of profit. It's not numbers on spreadsheets, it's real people with real lives, real families. So what do you propose? Mark asked. How do we fix this? Charlie opened another folder. I have a 5-point action plan. First, immediate establishment of an independent ethics and conduct committee. 3 external members, experts in labor rights and occupational health, who will have authority to investigate all complaints of harassment. Several directors nodded in approval. Second, he continued, zero tolerance policy for abusive managers. And when I say zero, I mean zero. It doesn't matter if the person is hitting targets or generating profit. Toxic behavior results in immediate termination. And who defines what is toxic? Patricia asked with a touch of defiance. The committee, Charlie replied calmly, based on objective and well-defined criteria that we will establish. But to give you an idea, publicly humiliating someone definitely qualifies. Third point, Charlie proceeded. Complete audit of all hirings, promotions and firings in the last 2 years. I want to understand if there were biases, favoritism or retaliation. If we find injustices, we will correct them. That could be expensive, Robert pointed out. I don't care, Charlie said firmly. Justice has no price. Fourth, implementation of anonymous reporting channels managed externally. Employees need to be sure they can report problems without fear of retaliation. And fifth, Charlie paused, looking each director in the eye. You, the leadership, will undergo mandatory training in humanized management, non-violent communication, and harassment prevention. And no, it is not optional. The meeting continued for 2 more hours. Charlie presented every change in detail, answered objections, and listened to suggestions. When he finally finished, he gave a clear ultimatum to the leadership. Adapt to the new culture of respect, or find another job. There was no middle ground. Everyone was dismissed except Patricia. She remained seated as the others left, some casting looks of pity in her direction, others avoiding her gaze completely. When the room was empty, only Charlie, Marianne, and Patricia remained. The silence was heavy, loaded with unresolved tension. Patricia finally looked up. "You set all this up," she said, but her voice was void of conviction. "You tricked me, made me look like an idiot." Charlie pulled up a chair and sat facing her at the same level. "I didn't set anything up, Patricia. I gave you an opportunity. 6 months of opportunities, actually." He clasped his hands. "Every day you humiliated someone, every time you abused your power, I was watching, hoping, perhaps naively, that you would show some sign of humanity." "I was doing my job," she retorted, but the words sounded hollow. "I was bringing results." "Destroying people in the process," Charlie completed. He opened a folder Marianne had brought. "Do you know what this is? These are letters, 17 letters from employees who left the company under your management." He picked one up. "This is from Henry Smith, a financial analyst. He was 24 when he started here, full of dreams and energy. After a year working directly with you, he developed severe depression and had to take leave." Charlie placed the letter on the table. "He never returned to the corporate world. Today he works as a teacher at a technical school because he can no longer handle high-pressure environments. I can't be held responsible for people's individual weaknesses." Patricia tried to argue, but her voice was getting weaker. "Weaknesses?" Charlie leaned forward. "Patricia, have you ever stopped to think about what makes a person strong?" He didn't wait for an answer. "Strength isn't crushing others. Strength isn't making people afraid of you. True strength is lifting people up, helping them grow, creating an environment where everyone can thrive." Patricia finally crumbled. Tears began to fall, staining the mahogany table. "I learned that I had to be strong," she whispered. "In the corporate world, if you're not strong, you get stepped on. That's what I was taught." "And who taught you that?" Charlie asked gently. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "My first boss, my mentor. He said kindness was weakness, that respect had to be earned through fear." She looked at Charlie. "And it worked. I climbed the ladder, got promotions, made money." "But at what cost, Patricia?" Charlie asked. "Are you happy? Do you have real friends? Can you sleep at night knowing the impact you have on people's lives?" She didn't answer, just cried harder. Marianne, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Patricia, I'm going to be honest with you. The investigation we will conduct will likely result in your termination for cause. There is too much evidence, too many witnesses." Her voice was professional, but not cruel. "But you still have a choice about how you leave here." "And what choice is that?" Patricia asked, raising her swollen eyes. "You can leave fighting, denying everything, blaming others," Charlie said. "Or you can accept responsibility for what you did, apologize genuinely to the people you hurt, and use this experience to become a better person." Patricia sat in silence for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was small, broken. "I was horrible, wasn't I, to so many people?" "Yes," Charlie answered honestly. "You were. But recognizing that is the first step." 3 weeks passed. Tech Vision Consulting was unrecognizable. The ethics committee had been established and was already investigating the accumulated complaints. Marianne was promoted to Director of Human Resources, with expanded authority and a budget to implement wellness and mental health programs. Charlie walked the corridors of the company, and the difference was palpable. Employees smiled, talked animatedly. The air was no longer heavy with tension and fear. In the cafeteria, he saw mixed groups from different departments having lunch together, laughing, planning projects. Sophie Carter stopped him in the hallway. "Mr. Edwards," she said, a genuine smile on her face. "I just wanted to say thank you. For the first time in 2 years, I wake up without dreading coming to work." "How is your blood pressure?" Charlie asked with concern. "Improving," she replied. "My doctor is impressed with how fast it's getting better." She paused. "Real changes make a real difference." That afternoon, Marianne knocked on Charlie's office door. She was carrying a thick folder. "It's the final report on Patricia," she said, placing it on the desk. Charlie opened it and read in silence. The investigation had confirmed multiple instances of harassment, creation of a hostile work environment, and abuse of authority. The recommendation was termination for cause. "But there is an additional note," Marianne said, pointing to the last page. "Patricia asked to speak with some of the people she hurt the most, and surprisingly, some accepted." Charlie raised his eyebrows. "And how did those conversations go?" Marianne sat down. According to the reports, she apologized genuinely. She didn't try to justify herself or minimize what she did. She just acknowledged the damage and said she was seeking therapy to understand and change her behavior patterns. "That doesn't erase what she did," Charlie said carefully. "No," Marianne agreed, "but maybe it shows that people can change if they really want to." The following week, Charlie called a general meeting with all company employees. The auditorium was packed, with people sitting on the steps and standing in the back. There was an energy in the air, a mix of hope and apprehension. Charlie took the stage and looked at the sea of faces. Some he recognized from the last 6 months, people he had worked side by side with without them knowing who he really was. "I want to start," he said, "by apologizing. I founded this company 15 years ago with the promise of creating a place where people could work with dignity, respect, and purpose. And at some point I stepped away. I let other priorities take my time, and in that absence I allowed a toxic culture to take hold." The auditorium was dead silent. "That is my responsibility," Charlie continued, his voice carrying emotion. "I should have been here. I should have paid attention to the signs. Every person who left, every complaint that was ignored, every employee who developed health issues due to the work environment. Part of that blame is mine." He paused, letting the words resonate. "But I want you to know that this changes now, not just in words, but in concrete actions." He detailed all the changes being implemented, from the ethics committee to the new reporting channels, mental health programs, and equity audits. "I know trust isn't rebuilt overnight," he said. "I know some of you are still skeptical, and you have every right to be, but I promise one thing. Never again will we prioritize profits over people. Never again will we tolerate behavior that destroys human dignity, no matter how good the financial numbers are." The audience began to applaud, slowly at first, then growing into a thunder of support. "And finally," Charlie said, raising his hands to silence the crowd, "I want to share a lesson I learned in the last 6 months." He smiled. "Working as a maintenance employee, I learned that there is no small job or insignificant person. The technician fixing the AC is just as important as the director signing contracts. The person cleaning the bathrooms deserves the same respect as the one leading meetings." He looked at Claire, who was sitting in the 3rd row. She had agreed to return to the company after Charlie personally contacted her and guaranteed that things had changed. "Never judge someone by their appearance or their job title," Charlie concluded, "because sometimes the person fixing your air conditioner might be the owner of the company, and more importantly, because every human being, regardless of what they do, deserves respect and dignity." He paused one last time, his eyes scanning the auditorium. "Because in the end, it's not the profits or the titles that matter. It's how we treat each other. It's whether we can look in the mirror and like the person we see. And it's whether we can create a place where people thrive, not just survive." The crowd stood up, applauding. It wasn't just professional recognition. It was gratitude, hope, and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, things could really change. Charlie stepped down from the stage and was immediately surrounded by employees wanting to shake his hand, share their stories, or simply say thank you. Among them was Lucas, the intern who had questioned if the changes were real. "Thank you," Lucas said simply, "for not giving up on us." Charlie smiled. "I would never give up. You are the heart of this company." As the sun set over the New York skyline, Charlie stood at his office window, looking at the city. There was a lot of work ahead. Rebuilding trust would take time. Some wounds were too deep to heal completely. But for the first time in a long while, he had hope. Hope that the company he had founded with so much love could once again become a place of dignity, respect, and growth. Marianne entered the office with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Charlie. "Long day," she said. "Long but necessary," he replied, accepting the cup. "How are you feeling about all this?" She thought for a moment. Hopeful, exhausted, but mostly proud. Proud to be part of this change. Charlie raised his cup in a silent toast. "And to think it all started with a broken air conditioner," Marianne laughed, "and an arrogant director who underestimated the wrong person." "No," Charlie corrected gently, "a lost director who needed to learn an important lesson." He looked out the window again. "Just like all of us." And as night fell over the city, Tech Vision Consulting began a new chapter. A chapter where respect wasn't an optional courtesy, but the true fuel that made any helicopter take flight. The end. If Charlie and Tech Vision Consulting's transformation touched your heart, you are not alone. This is just one of many emotional stories we share about overcoming obstacles, justice, and the power of human respect. Stories that remind us it's never too late to change, that kindness is not weakness, and that every person deserves dignity. Want to continue this journey with us? Then, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new stories. Leave a like if this narrative moved you, and in the comments, share. Have you ever lived through or witnessed a similar situation? How did you handle it? Your story could inspire thousands of people. Remember, respect is the fuel that moves the world. Let's build a place together where everyone can fly high without fear of being brought down. See you in the next story.